If you love immersing yourself into the inner psychology of the Victorian era and its obsession with interpersonal relations, and to get a feel for the true prototype of most modern TV dramas, stay tuned. Welcome to Biblicultus, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. And also, don't forget to follow me on X, and also visit my merch store if you're interested in getting a few items that kind of represent the store and help promote it as well, if you wish. And I really appreciate any and all of these things until I'm able to get to a level here on YouTube in which I can offer subscriptions. These are really the only ways that I can help you spread the word so the channel can grow and I can dedicate more time to the channel. Now, in this episode, I'm reviewing Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Classic. Most people have read it either through their school curricula or just because it is such a famous work. This edition that I have is from Fall River Press from 2023. Now, I've reviewed, I think, another book from the same publisher, and these are very accessible, low-cost versions of classics, and they do come with actually old paintings or drawings from the time. They're just integrated nicely into the work. The only negative of these kinds of books is that the pages are the kind that are shiny like a magazine paper, and that's not necessarily that great when you're reading with some sort of light. It will reflect back on you. It's not necessarily very pleasant sometimes, but it's still a nice edition, and I actually like it. Now, even though it is a classic and most people have read it, I don't want to spoil it, so I'm just going to go over the basic topics in the work that I think merit pointing out. So the intimacy of the writing is indeed superb, and it stands out from the beginning. You're slowly basically drawn into an absurdly mundane world of expectations, of social fears, and you would assume something like this would be dreadfully dry, but it's actually a very powerful way of drawing you into another world. So in that sense, as a writer, she was obviously very good. Now, female characters and their peculiar concerns are at the heart of the novel, obviously. So it is a masterclass on not only general female psychology, which is always fascinating, but also a window into a very particular time with a particular female psychology. So it's a really good way to kind of try to comprehend how women saw the world at the time. And from that point of view, it brings a historical dynamic to the work that someone that read it at the time wouldn't have gotten necessarily. From reading it from my period of time, it adds that dimension, which I think is fascinating. It also reflects a very particular class concern. And that to me is also peculiar because we're talking about a time period in which you had a very class-conscious society. You had the upper classes, the elites, etc. I mean, that's the same in every society. But in this particular period, all the social interactions are rigidly controlled by this aspect. It reminds me of a lot of the Japanese novels and a lot of the history of samurai culture in a weird way, because the class concern was so powerful at the time that it could really drive the entire attitude and perspective on life. And its rigidity was very influential. In this work, it's living in that kind of realm and in a particular class. So you're not really reading about a lower class, or it reminds me of Dickens, for example, who tends to focus more on the orphans and the abandoned or forgotten men and women and children. But Here, she's more concerned about this kind of particular pastoral lifestyle of not really high class people, but kind of lower nobility, if you will. Now, another thing that I find curious is that although the female characters in the work may seem boorish and self-indulgent and in a somewhat negative way to many readers, aside from all of that, the male characters are to me quite petty, and I would say they're worse because she paints them as very weak and somewhat pathetic and highly micromanaged by their mothers or the women they fall in love into or the women they must marry for the sake of money and social status, so that even the men seem very feminine in the work, which I think is fascinating. Without hyper-analyzing the work, but I think that this could be a situation in which the female writer is trying to somehow understand the male psychology, but from a distance, so that you get a somewhat feminine perspective of why men act in particular ways and react in particular ways. And that's sociologically very interesting. And I think it probably feels the same way when women read books by men who are speaking on female psychology or how they think internally. I guess it may feel the same way, that this is a man trying to figure out or understand how women think or feel. Very difficult thing to do unless you're a superb writer, and I think she is. Because the truth of the matter, I have known men like this, especially in the modern world. It's just that at the same time, I do think the male characters are much worse when it comes to their pettiness and superficiality. And I think that's cool. I think it gives a character to the work. Now, I would say that sometimes it is quite difficult for me to imagine these people as real and not as mere perceptions, almost like an abstract or partially abstract presentation of actual people, so that it becomes a somewhat emotional and fantastical interpretation of how men and women actually interact. So there's an innocence to the characters that I find actually refreshing, because unfortunately this innocence is almost completely lost in most circles in modern society. I say most because there are people that live still traditional lives and traditional conceptions of mating and meeting people and interacting with adults, etc. And I think that for the sake of decency and for the sake of social cohesion, it was better when there was innocence in the population, when men and women interacted to such a point in which even suggesting or alluding to the possibility of marriage was considered to be scandalous if it was not followed through. Whereas these days, that's not even a subject and no one cares, and promiscuity is the mainstream perception of what is normative. Whereas here, it's a completely different world, and I would argue that in that sense, these women were very strict and respected themselves to such a point that any insinuation from a man was seen as a negative, a weakness from the man. He was not able to follow through and follow his word. Or if he flirted too much and then he backed out, it was considered to be a very dark thing to do. So I think that in itself is very fascinating. Another interesting aspect of the work is its conversational narrative. It's not really a lot of action or location shopping in the work. It's not about where they are that much or when they are that much, but more about their conversations and their feelings. So it's a very cerebral work, and that again is worth it because it changes the speed of most novels. At the time, I would say, actually, because I've read novels of the time that were not structured really like this. But the Victorian era, it's a big moment in history for female readers. I mean, there was a huge explosion of literature that was directed at that market, so that you have a change in the entire demographic of how novels were written, why they were written, and for whom. So in principle, it should be a novel I would find boring and somewhat useless in the sense of kind of managing the emotions and the absurd ups and downs of fictional characters and their feelings. And many of these feelings are kind of fossils of a time of a golden era of tranquility and a lot of change also. But it's for this reason that I like it, because it allows me a small portal into a somewhat superfluous and pleasant world in which human relationships, courtship, and love was above all other considerations. It was like the center of everything. And I think this is devolving in modern times to such a level that being able to see that world, to be able to take a vacation in that world, is a very meaningful experience. And I would actually suggest that everyone, men, women, everyone, goes through that experience. I think a lot of that mindset would be beneficial to, at least in part, acquire, I think. Obviously, I recommend the work, and I think that I will eventually get to her other novels that I think are going to be pretty nice to review. But hopefully this gives you an encouragement to find whatever edition you can find. They're very nice, fancy editions of her works, and those would be cool to have as well. But again, the content is king, so just pick whichever one you think is best for you, and I think you will derive a lot of benefit from it. And again, I appreciate you tuning in, and remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. I hope you enjoyed this small review here, so thank you for being with me. See you next time.